I'm Cath Pickett, Quarry Inspector for the Health and Safety Executive. I'm recording this webinar for the Derbyshire branch of the Institute of Quarrying in April 2020. I hope you find it useful and informative.
My plan is to talk through some frequently asked questions from quarry operators regarding the coronavirus outbreak. I'm going to talk through some isolation procedures. Now these are about isolation from sources of energy as opposed to the isolation we now find ourselves in. I'm going to run through some safety alerts on bridge saw guarding, respirable crystalline silica, welding fume. I'm going to update you on some of the new pieces of work coming out of Quinjack, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. You can have a look at some hazard spotting and we can talk through that together. Right, I'm going to run through these frequently asked questions. Now, one of the ones that came on early was to what to do about geotechnical assessments that are overdue or becoming overdue. Now, the line on this is that HSE quarry inspectors will take a pragmatic view with regard to timescales for geotechnical assessment in the current circumstances. For any significant overrun or where a significant change has occurred, the operator should take all reasonable steps as a form of an interim measure. Above all, the quarry operators are still expected to operate a quarry in accordance with a design arising out of appraisal and assessment and carry out inspections, etc. as required. Examples of some basic measures that operators may take, so this will come into your all reasonable steps. 1. Record and justify the decision for not undertaking the assessment. 2. Carry out inspections as per the regime and reappraise the structure to check that if any change has occurred from the design or there's a change in geology, geotechnical feature, etc. If not, then the structure likely remains in a stable and safe condition. 3. If a change has occurred, then the operator should make contact with, send photographs, videos, etc. to the geotechnical specialist for further advice. If in doubt about the safety and stability of a structure, stop work in that area of the quarry and evacuate personnel to a safe distance. In the event that the changes have impacted upon or are likely to impact upon infrastructure or land outside the site, then other physical steps may need to be taken to mitigate the failure and or remediate to protect members of the public. Another question is what to do about statutory lifting equipment and pressure vessels tests. Well, the link here is on the slide, and the guidance is that there is statutory obligation to ensure that work plant and equipment is maintained and is safe to use remains in place, and the use of inspection and tests continues to be a fundamental part of the management process. HSE expects duty holders to make all reasonable efforts to arrange for the equipment tests to be carried out within the statutory time limits. This includes ensuring inspection bodies have access to equipment in a timely manner, working with the inspection body to manage the appropriate social distancing in the workplace to satisfy both your needs and those of the inspection body as part of the government drive to manage the spread of COVID-19. If your business is not currently operating and staff are furloughed, consider allowing access to the inspection body so that equipment is ready for when your business reopens. Otherwise, you may have to delay restarting that equipment until it has been subject to a test. If your inspection body is unable to provide engineers due to staff absence, make reasonable attempts to source engineers from another provider. Another question that came in was, can you use disposable RPE if it is in short supply or you run out? Well, the answer to this is, if you look at the HSE publication HSG 53 for recommended wear times for the disposable RPE, and also look at manufacturers' guidance on reuse and cleaning, and there's a link there to disposable respirator guidance. Another question that came in is, do I have to face fit test in these times? And the answer to that question is yes. There's some guidance below, but I'll run through the basics of it with you. People who have symptoms of COVID-19 or are isolating in accordance with government guidance should not attend a face fit test. To minimise the risk of transmission of COVID-19 during face fit testing, the following additional measures should be taken. Fit testers should follow government advice on social distancing, as they can make observations from this distance and deliver any instructions verbally. Those being fitted should keep their respirators on if closer observation is required to minimise the risk to the testers. Both the fit tester and those being fit tested should wash their hands before and after the test in accordance with NHS guidelines. Those being fitted with non-disposable masks should clean the mask themselves before and immediately after the test using a suitable disinfectant cleaning wipe. Check with manufacturer to avoid damaging the mask. Test face pieces that cannot be adequately disinfected, such as disposable half masks. They shouldn't be used by more than one individual. Fit testers should wear disposable gloves when undertaking cleaning of the tubes, hoods, etc., and ensure that they remove gloves following the correct procedure. Immediately dispose of used gloves, disposable masks, cleaning wipes in a waste bin. Fit testers should familiarise themselves with potential contact points and actions to minimise transmission, and those are available on that guidance that's linked to this slide. A lot of us who are used to wearing disposable RPE will have been watching the television and seeing that lots of other people haven't been applying it appropriately. We have a poster which is available through the links on the previous slide about how to put on your disposable respirator and some checks that you can carry out. So thought that might be quite helpful to show you. Question that came in was, what is acceptable in terms of welfare facilities for visiting lorry drivers? Well, the HSE guidance is being kept up to date on the link below, but in effect, all drivers must have access to welfare facilities in the premises they visit as part of their work. Some drivers are not being allowed to use welfare facilities when they deliver. Preventing access to this is against the law, and equally, in these times, it is not the sensible thing to do. Those who already provide reasonable access to toilets and hand washing facilities should continue to do so. With the latest advice for hands to be washed regularly, failure to allow access to welfare facilities may increase the risk of the COVID-19 infection spreading. What should I be doing re social distancing in the workplace? Well, there's guidance available here, and some of that I'll pull out and talk to you about in a minute. In effect, we're trying to achieve the 2 metres, 6 feet apart, and the regular hand washing. Some of the sites have been modifying the start and finish times and break times of employees, and also the necessity to clock in where one person has been going and clocking in for others. We've come across that. The guidance is that where it is not possible to follow the social distancing guidelines in full in relation to a particular activity, you should consider whether that activity needs to continue for the business to continue to operate, and if so, take all the mitigating actions possible to reduce the risk of transmission between staff. So in effect, carry out a risk assessment. If a 2 metre distance cannot be maintained, staff should work side by side or facing away from each other, rather than face to face if possible. You should communicate to all staff that they should wash their hands with soap and water for 20 seconds or more, and more frequently than normal. If workers have to share enclosed spaces, such as the cabs of vehicles, they should keep the window open for ventilation, and they should be careful to avoid touching their face at all times. On leaving the enclosed space, they should wash their hands with soap and water for 20 seconds or more, or use hand sanitizer when they cannot wash their hands. If customer facing, you should consider how you can safely sell your products or services without encouraging crowds, and ensure hygiene measures are in place. This could be done by taking orders online or by telephone in advance, and pre-packing orders to limit face-to-face time, or considering delivery services where possible. When interacting with customers, you should maintain a 2 metre distance as much as possible. To protect your staff, you should remind colleagues daily to only come into work if they are well, and no one in their household is self-isolating. As I say, the guidance is being kept up to date at that link, so I'd encourage you to have a look at it. Isolation. As I say, this is isolation from sources of energy rather than from other people. In the past talks I've given, I've focused on the policy elements of lockout, tryout, etc., and the hardware needed to be able to implement this. I would ask you to review your site-specific procedures to check that they are fit for purpose, and easily implemented and understood on site. The first step is to carry out a thorough review of your site-specific isolation procedure in conjunction with your competent electrician to ensure that it is effective in practice. So that is the essential first step, because whatever comes along behind this, then we want to make sure that what's actually required is correct in order to give safe and effective isolation. So the company will set the policy, and that'll be Le Toto, etc. And the site sets a procedure. As the variances in control systems, isolation hardware, etc. are site specific. You may have multiple systems and hardware on site, depending on the age and history of the plant. So there is an expectation that procedure covers the following, which is specific to the quarry and its plant. So we're looking at how to securely isolate the items of plant and machinery at the quarry, including mobile plant. This will include instructions on where and how to isolate the equipment, what hardware is used, and that the basic standard is that each person working on the task has applied their own padlock to the isolator, lockbox or other device to secure the isolation effect. Where and how is not just Le Toto, everything, or left as an item to be dealt with in the task risk assessment. Find out what needs to be done and make the instructions clear. If nothing else, the Quarries Regulations, Regulation 10, requires the quarry operator to ensure that rules are in place at the quarry with a view to securing the health and safety of persons at work at the quarry, and also those who may be directly affected by activities at the quarry. And these rules should also cover the safe use of equipment. These rules should be kept at the quarry and given to anyone who has duties imposed by them, and these rules should be comprehensible. The operator should take all reasonable steps to ensure that the rules are understood, followed and complied with. How to test out the effectiveness of the isolation. So this includes what steps to take in trying to start the equipment to prove that isolation has been effective. There may be a sequence of switches or buttons within the control system that need to be activated in order to ensure that the isolation has been properly tested before work begins. And if they're activated in the wrong order, then the test may not be appropriate. So it's about making sure it's right for your site. It may be that the part of the plant to be tested cannot be seen or heard from the control room. So instructions of how to ensure that the plant hasn't started may be needed. For example, the use of ammeter readings, sending a worker to the equipment within radio contact to confirm that the plant didn't start when tested, etc. The only note of warning about using ammeter readings is that if ammeters have broken, then they could potentially send a false positive. So some site, if it's not a breakdown situation, they're actually watching the plant run, stop it, watching the needle on the ammeter go back to 0, and then test it again straight away. It's one way of getting around that. So the procedure also needs to cover what to do when an unexpected event occurs. This will include instructions when the job changes, someone leaves the job or joins it, and what to do in the event that a padlock has been left on and a person has left site. It should also include a step for dealing with the eventuality of the plant starting up during the test step, i.e. the isolation having been ineffective. What sort of things will you do when that happens? What training is required for management supervisors and workers? Well, the expectation is that managers and supervisors will have a higher level of training than others in order that they can manage and enforce the system that you have put in place for isolation. How are contractors and others unfamiliar with your procedure kept safe within the procedure? The expectation would that they would apply their own padlock to an isolation that was overseen by someone from your organisation, trained and competent to do so. Some contractors may well be on your site so often that you provide the same level of training and assessment that you would for your own staff. How will the users of the procedure be assessed in its safe use? Well, here again, the expectation would be that they would be shown what to do, then assessed to ensure that they can put it into practice. You may also carry out reassessment at predetermined intervals and if circumstances change. What monitoring and supervision requirements will you have to make sure that the procedure is complied with? The expectation would be that you could prove that monitoring and supervision were carried out to ensure that instructions are followed and to help identify any problems or barriers that may develop when putting the procedure into practice. This is your chance to check. You may find these links useful. Here are Agnet, HSE, safequarry.com, guidance. A lot of work's been put into this area. So before we move on, we'll have a think about another chance to check. We're looking at using feedback from employees, contractors and others as to how your procedure is working. Things like visual felt leadership, safety tours, looking at isolation procedures. Any chance to check is a chance to look at any potential holes in your system, any barriers to isolation, and make sure that you can get rid of those. Quarry specific notifications, been asked about this a few times, and going around the country I've spoken to other branches. We'd like all notifications to be sent to formsadmin.cardiff@hse.gov.uk. The information that we require in relation to geotechnical and significant hazards is a brief description of the excavation or tip, including its location, size and the material to be excavated or tipped, and in relation to excavations and tips that require a geotechnical assessment, the conclusions reached by the geotechnical assessment specialist. And we're also happy to accept Regulation 45 notifications of quarrying operations to that same email address as the postbox for the whole of the GB quarries. These are the ratings that we use out on inspection. As you can see, they range from the enforcement management model risk gap that HSE use, from extreme to none, and the enforcement expectation running along the bottom is from prosecution ranging through to none, with the performance score as 60 as unacceptable, running to 10 as exemplary. Now, within all our various topics that we're using, geotechnical, blasting management, RCS control, traffic management, pedestrian segregation, etc., then you will be given a score at the end of the inspection. There's some safety alerts that I promised I would run through. Bridge saw guarding. I've got a booklet of guarding guidance from the MPA. HSE guidance is on the website. The machines already in use should have been supplied to comply with the General Machinery Directive. They shouldn't need to be upgraded, but we do come across machines that have either neither complied properly or have had safeguards removed. Unannounced visits to dimension stone and slate quarries were planned. I'm sure they will continue to ensure compliance with these guidance documents. Chains are no longer acceptable as a method of guarding bridge saws. What we're looking for is interlocked gates. What we're asking is that you review your management arrangements, preventing and or controlling the risk of exposure to respirable crystalline silica dust. There's also guidance here. There's cautious sensors for stonemasons, cautious sensors for quarries. Lots of guidance there. There was going to be unannounced visits in early 2020. I imagine that these will still happen. It's under the occupational lung disease work plan. All inspectors, including those who inspect factories and non-quarry premises, will be checking to ensure that your control measures for RCS to the right standard. There's been a change in enforcement expectation for mild steel welding fume. In effect, there's new evidence to suggest that exposure can cause lung cancer, limited evidence linked to kidney cancer, but also there are some Parkinson's type symptoms associated with it. Regardless of duration, HSE will no longer accept any welding undertaken without any suitable exposure control measures in place, as there's no known level of safe exposure. Risk assessment should reflect the change in the expected control measures. So what we're looking for is RPE, respiratory protective equipment, such as an Airstream type helmet with appropriate filters or air supply, properly maintained, and people are trained in its use. That would be acceptable for outdoor use. It might be appropriate for indoor use as well, the RPE Airstream type helmet, if controlled access for third parties is in place. Clearly, the first step for anyone carrying out welding activities is to review their risk assessment in line with the new guidance and identify what else might be required. The British Occupational Hygiene Society welding tool website is something you could refer to as part of your assessment, and HSE websites. This is the BOHS website with the address there at the bottom. A note just that this tool will send you beyond minimum legal compliance. Quinjack, there have been some new Toolbox Talks published on the website. There's a few in the road haulage section: vehicle breakdown, safe tipping, vehicle isolation and key control, and safe loading. And there's a new one in geotechnical, blast designs and techniques to improve quarry face stability. The proviso with that guidance is that seek geotechnical advice before trying the techniques and involve your geotechnical specialist in the decision making there. Now, these are things that I found in visits in March. We've got a excavator here excavating the face. There's a just see the lip there of the mobile crusher. It's got a bit of a pad. You can see where the back of the face is, the rock pile in the face is here. What is missing from that slide, apart from the excavator driver, because I called him over to talk to me. Okay, very good. No rock trap in place. So where does that fit in our rating system? Have a look. Where do you think? Okay, well, there were some things on site that were done rather well. So I had them as poor, significantly below the relevant minimum legal requirement, because they had limited recognition of the essential of having a rock trap in place, and they ended up with a letter. Okay, this is a block built switch room in a quarry. It's amongst the quarry plant. The 40mm stockpile has been built against the structure of the building, and the action of the stockpile and the loading shovel has knocked the switch room door, kicked the switch room door in, if you like, and there's 40mm all over the floor. The panels are not completely sealed. What we would expect is that there is a means of making sure that unauthorised access to switch room. The score, I went with very poor for this. Failures were not recognised, and they had not recognised that they needed to take remedial action until I arrived. This is a tail drum of a project conveyor. See in the centre that there is a hole being cut in the mesh of the guarding. There's also no underbelly guard on this conveyor, so access to dangerous parts of machinery. The reason for cutting a hole in the guard was to access a grease nipple for the bearing. Now, this can be done using remote grease lines, and this also was in place on other parts of the quarry plant. The guards hadn't been installed very long, but the employees had still gone along and cut a hole in it, and the people carrying out the inspections within the management structure had not identified this until the time of the visit either. So I was particularly concerned about competence at a number of levels as well. Well, what did I decide was the performance in relation to that? I identified that it was very poor, not just in terms of the standard of the guarding and non-compliance with British standard and provision and use of work equipment legislation. Then that competence was also lacking, so the improvement notices that followed the visit dealt with both guarding standards and also competence to look at a more sustainable outcome for the visit. That comes to the end of my presentation. If any of you got any questions, then I'm happy to receive them either by telephone or by email, and I just hope that you all stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you when times return to some kind of normality. Thank you for listening.